Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. My guest today is a man who literally built the soundtrack of the 20th century. He took a struggling patchwork of radio stations and forged it into the media empire we know as CBS, the Tiffany Network. Please welcome the legendary media pioneer, William S. Paley. Bill, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Calvin.
Let's dive right into those early days, Bill. When you first conceived of your business, the world was a very different place. Radio was just this strange, novel box in the living room. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
It really goes back to my family's business, the Congress Cigar Company. We manufactured a brand called La Polina, named after my mother, Goldie. In the mid-1920s, while managing our advertising, we decided to try a little experiment. We sponsored a local program called the La Polina Hour on a station in Philadelphia. The results were immediate and staggering. Cigar sales went right through the roof. That was my exact lightning bolt moment. I realized that radio wasn't just a gimmick or a hobby for tech enthusiasts. It was a potent, magical pipeline straight into the American home. My father and uncle were certainly traditionalists, and they were skeptical about throwing serious money into the airwaves. But the numbers didn't lie. I used the raw, undeniable proof of those skyrocketing cigar sales to convince them that the airwaves were the future of mass commerce.
That is incredible. You saw the advertising potential before almost anyone else. But leaving behind the safety of a thriving family millionaire cigar business to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in? And what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
Oh, my life was comfortable, secure, and entirely mapped out for me. I was a young vice president fresh out of the Wharton School, working in a highly lucrative family empire. But when the opportunity arose in 1928 to purchase a controlling interest in United Independent Broadcasters, which we rebranded as the Columbia Broadcasting System, I knew I had to jump. The day I decided to go all in, I packed my bags, left the security of Philadelphia, and moved straight to New York City. I was young, full of energy, and surrounded by older business executives who thought I was absolutely out of my mind to leave a guaranteed fortune for a struggling, debt-ridden web of radio stations. My core belief was that people had an insatiable hunger for high-quality entertainment and information delivered instantly. I believed with everything I had that if we focused on the quality of what went over the air, the audience would follow, and the advertisers would pay dearly for that reach.
You had that unshakable vision right from the start. In the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no capital, and no blueprint. What was the one truth you held onto that everyone else around you dismissed?
The prevailing wisdom at the time, particularly from our early rivals, was that individual radio stations were the primary clients. The old blueprint was to make the local stations pay the network for programs. I saw it completely upside down, a truth that others dismissed as financial madness. I believed that the programming should be provided to the affiliate stations for free or at a nominal cost. My truth was that the network's real revenue stream wouldn't come from charging our own stations, but from selling corporate advertisers a massive, uniform, guaranteed nationwide audience. By giving our programming away to affiliates, we grew our footprint rapidly, signing up 49 stations almost overnight. Everyone told me we would bleed to death giving away our product, but I knew that a massive synchronized audience was the ultimate prize.
And it worked beautifully. But long before CBS became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure or setback. What went wrong, and how did you find the willpower to restart?
In those very early days, we were bleeding cash rapidly. and the network was plagued by intense technical and financial instability. We were competing against NBC, which had a massive head start and far deeper pockets. There was a moment right at the beginning where the financial commitments for line charges from the telephone companies almost crushed us before we could even secure our first major national advertisers. It looked like we might fold before we ever truly stood up. What kept me going was pure, unadulterated stubbornness and an absolute refusal to let my family's investment vanish. I spent sleepless nights reworking our contracts, pounding the pavement in New York to find sponsors, and restructuring our affiliate agreements. I found the willpower by focusing entirely on the talent. I knew if I could secure the voices people loved, the financial wall would crumble.
Innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public or the industry initially rejected or ridiculed? How did you respond?
When I began fiercely investing in and building CBS News, many insiders thought I was wasting precious airtime and capital. Entertainment was the big moneymaker. Comedians, singers, variety shows. Spending massive amounts of money to send reporters across the globe seemed like an expensive, unnecessary burden to many. But I was convinced that broadcast journalism could be the true, moral spine of the network. During the dark and turbulent years leading into World War II, I doubled down. We recruited brilliant, sharp young minds like Edward R. Murrow and William L. Shirer. The skeptics thought the public just wanted escapism, but when the world caught fire, the public turned to us to hear Murrow's voice, reporting live from the London Blitz. We responded to the initial indifference by setting a standard of rigorous objectivity and unparalleled depth, and it forged our identity as the Tiffany Network.
Behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure, whether from financial panics, internal betrayal, or personal doubt. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
The pressure could be suffocating at times, Calvin. Navigating corporate infighting, dealing with volatile talent, and managing the immense responsibility of shaping public opinion during times of war and political crisis weighed heavily on me. I shouldered that burden by surrounding myself with the absolute best creative minds and maintaining a clear, distinct boundary for our news division. Even when our journalists took positions or reported on stories that caused immense corporate headaches or advertiser backlash, I tried to anchor myself in the fundamental belief that our credibility was our greatest asset. You have to learn to compartmentalize the noise, focus entirely on the quality of the programming, and remember that a captain must remain steady if the ship is to weather the storm.
Let's talk about the people who helped you build that ship. Who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
Beyond my family's financial backing, the early station owners who agreed to join our network were our first true believers. Convincing them required a mix of youthful enthusiasm and a completely new business proposition. I didn't just sell them on a concept, I sold them a solution to their programming problems. I would look them in the eye and guarantee them high-quality, star-studded programs from New York that they could never afford to produce locally, all delivered right to their towers. Advertisers were another tough sell early on. I had to convince traditional print advertisers to trust an invisible medium. I did it by bringing in sensational talent like Bing Crosby, the Mills Brothers, and Kate Smith. Once they heard the public reaction to those voices, the early customers were entirely hooked.
Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
The definitive momentum shift happened in 1929, just a year after I took the reins. We expanded our network to 49 stations, and we secured a massive investment and distribution partnership with Paramount famous Lasky Corporation. That was the milestone where the financial floor stabilized completely. But the true creative breakthrough, the moment I knew we were going to dominate, came slightly later when I successfully engineered what the press called the talent raids on NBC. Luring top-tier stars like Jack Benny, Red Skelton, and Burns and Allen over to CBS completely shattered our rivals' monopoly. When those icons packed up and moved to our microphone stands, I knew we had permanently changed the entire landscape of American broadcasting.
You didn't just build a company, you built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
It all came down to an unyielding obsession with what went over the air. I used to spend hours listening to our broadcasts, monitoring every single detail from the tone of an announcer's voice to the quality of the sound engineering. In that small room, I instilled a standard of glamour, prestige, and absolute quality. I made it clear to everyone that we weren't just a utility sending signals through the air. We were guests in the American living room. That meant our entertainment had to be the finest available, and our news had to be beyond reproach. That relentless pursuit of perfection became our culture, and it's why we earned the reputation of being the gold standard of broadcasting.
History books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
Many people look back and assume that CBS was an overnight success, born purely out of my family's wealth, or that I was just a wealthy socialite playing with a radio toy. They see the polished, glamorous corporate chairman and miss the gritty, exhausting combat of our early years. They flatten out the immense risks, the sleepless nights, the brutal corporate warfare with RCA and NBC, and the constant threat of financial ruin. It wasn't a neat, preordained march to the top. It was a fierce, daily hustle, driven by constant adaptation, intuition, and a willingness to bet everything on unproven talent.
Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision, and was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest sacrifice was without a doubt the balance of my personal life and the toll it took on my relationships. CBS was my first, most consuming love affair. I poured an immense amount of my time, my energy, and my soul into the network, often leaving very little of myself for anything or anyone else. The relentless demands of running a global media empire meant that business almost always came first. Looking back at the entirety of your journey, despite the steep personal costs and the sacrifices made along the way, it was ultimately worth it. To see a simple dream transform into a pillar of American culture that informed and entertained millions of people every single day was the greatest privilege of my life.
If you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
Trust your own golden instinct for talent. Look after the quality of the airwaves, and never let the skeptics dilute your grand vision.
Bill, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with our listeners before signing off?
I just want to express my deepest gratitude to you, Calvin, for bringing me on the show, and to the listeners for taking the time to hear my story. Broadcasting was always about connecting human beings, and it has been a true joy to connect with all of you once again. Thank you so much for having me.
It was an absolute honor, Bill. Thank you for sharing your incredible journey with us. What an amazing look into the birth of broadcasting. From utilizing radio to sell family cigars, to pulling off legendary talent raids and pioneering global broadcast news with figures like Edward R. Murrow. William S. Paley truly shaped the modern media landscape by trusting his gut and prioritizing quality above all else. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.